Hello everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar with Streakwave and MetaGeek. Today's webinar topic is Learn How to Get Started with Chanalyzer. This webinar will be recorded and we'll share it afterwards. We do love to hear your questions, so please type them in the Q&A section and we'll get them answered at the end of the presentation. Casey, you may go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Angela. And thank you everyone for joining us today. As Angela said, this webinar is about getting started with Chanalyzer, which is a MetaGeek spectrum analysis tool. A little bit on the agenda today. I'm going to introduce myself, talk a little bit about MetaGeek, go over some Wi-Fi fundamentals, which I think are pretty important to understand how to use Chanalyzer. So I'm going to kind of provide a brief kind of foundation there. And then we'll go ahead and just start with a demo of Chanalyzer. I'll kind of go over some main points of Chanalyzer and then demo the software live. So my name is Casey. I'm the CX specialist here at MetaGeek. So if you send in a support ticket, chances are I'll be the kind of first to respond to it. I have a few certifications put on by the CWNP program, which I highly recommend checking out to further your knowledge on Wi-Fi. They're pretty great certification program. And then you can also find me on Twitter at Kathy_Fi. There's a lot of Wi-Fi experts on Twitter, so I highly recommend checking that out as well. Just a little bit about MetaGeek. We're based here in Boise, Idaho. This is a picture outside of our office, although right now we're all pretty much working from home, so it's been a while since I've been there, and hopefully things will get back to normal soon, and I can go back into the office space here. Just to start right off the bat with a little bit about Wi-Fi, I think some of the most important things to understand, and some of you may know this already if you're interested in Wi-Fi tools, this is probably basic knowledge, but it's important to kind of understand, is that there's two bands that the FCC allows Wi-Fi to operate in. There's the 2.4 gigahertz band and the 5 gigahertz band. Just some notes here, the 2.4 gigahertz band has a bit of a longer wavelength. I'll try and draw it out here. It's about 5 inches or so wavelength here. And what this means is that this travels farther. This can attenuate through walls a little bit easier. It has a greater range, about 300 feet indoors, and a lot of devices use the 2.4 gigahertz band to talk, not just Wi-Fi devices, but non-Wi-Fi devices as well. So there's a lot of interference in this band, and that's why it's really important to have a spectrum analyzer. There's also only 3 non-overlapping channels in the 2.4 gigahertz band. That's 1, 6, and 11. So you'll hear me say this multiple times throughout this webinar. These are really only the 3 channels you want to use in the 2.4 gigahertz band. The 5 gigahertz band, on the other hand, is a little bit smaller. The wavelength is about 2.4, 2.5 inches or so. So what this means is that it can't really pierce through walls as well. It has a lower indoor range, talking about 90 feet. And not all Wi-Fi devices will actually work with this band. So kind of cheaper Wi-Fi devices are 2.4 only and don't support the 5 gigahertz band. But there's a lot more room, as you can see. There's 24 non-overlapping channels in the 2.4 gigahertz band. So it's a good idea to typically deploy as much as possible in the 5 gigahertz band. Just a quick note on some of the standards and kind of the history a little bit. Really the important takeaway from this slide is looking at the modulation scheme. When you see this DSSS modulation scheme with the spectrum analyzer, it kind of looks like this hill or curve shape, kind of like this. It's going to be about 20 megahertz wide, possibly up to 40 megahertz wide. In the, actually no, not DSSS, will only be 20 or 22 megahertz wide. And again, it kind of looks like this curve shape. If you see this curve shape, then you know that these data rates are being used, these lower data rates, very basic data rates. Whereas as soon as 802.11a came to play in 1999, we started using OFDM, which stands for orthogonal frequency division multiplex. That modulation scheme looks a little bit more like a haystack. It's a little bit more square shape. And this can be 20 to 40 to 80 to 160 megahertz wide. You'll see this kind of shape on a spectrum analyzer a little bit more. Then you know that these higher data rates are being used, 54 megabits per second and higher. So just so kind of important to keep that in mind. And I'll show you, hopefully my neighborhood here will have some examples of that. Just a quick note on Wi-Fi interference specifically. I get a lot of questions about this. Co-channel interference is always preferable to adjacent channel interference, but what does that mean exactly? In this example, let's just say that my neighbor and me were using channel 1 for our Wi-Fi networks. And so that means we have 2 networks on channel 1, and all of our Wi-Fi devices are using channel 1 to talk with our networks. Well, this is actually preferable to adjacent channel, whereas maybe I'm on channel 6 and maybe my network's on, or my neighbor is on channel 5, for instance. If you share the same channel as your neighbor, then your Wi-Fi devices are much more polite with each other. Basically, they'll hear each other on the channel and they'll wait their turn to talk. Whereas if you have Wi-Fi devices on adjacent channels, they no longer have that protocol of politeness, and they'll start to kind of yell over each other. And pretty soon your noise floor in your Wi-Fi environment gets higher and higher, and your Wi-Fi devices have to yell more and more in order to hear each other. And so pretty much after a while, you actually start losing connection to your devices. So that's why we always say, if there aren't any clear channels, it's better to share 1, 6, and 11 as opposed to trying to kind of fit in between those 3 channels in the 2.4 gigahertz band at least. Now, it's really important to have a spectrum analyzer like the Wi-Fi, which comes with Chanalyzer, because you can see this non-Wi-Fi stuff. Things like cordless phones, baby monitors, Xbox controllers, microwaves, they all have a tendency to leak RF in the 2.4 gigahertz band. And Wi-Fi devices think that those are Wi-Fi devices, and so they're still going to be polite to those interferers. This is a pretty good illustration of what spectrum analysis can kind of do for you. With a basic Wi-Fi scanner like Chanalyzer and Insider mostly is kind of MetaGeek's other basic Wi-Fi scanner, you sometimes don't get the complete picture. You can see all your networks and neighboring networks and things like that, and you can see that there's some adjacent channel networks here, which is helpful, but you have no idea that there's some sort of, if you actually plug in a Wi-Fi DBX spectrum analyzer, then you can see this spectrum information right here. You can see that there's some sort of significant interference here on about channel 13. And kind of the sideband of this interference is really starting to dip into channel 11 and even go all the way to channel 6 and elevate the noise floor in general in the 2.4 gigahertz band. So this is a really important tool to have, the Wi-Fi is, in order to kind of capture this spectrum information. And then just a quick note on Wi-Fi coverage. Chanalyzer will show you the signal strength of your network and neighboring networks, and a reliable signal strength for your network throughout your house is going to be about negative 67 dBm. This is a pretty, a lot of people kind of debate exactly, what this should be. If you have a media house or a hungry media household, where maybe you need to stream Netflix from multiple Wi-Fi devices, you might want something better like negative 60 dBm throughout the house. But we've tend to find that negative 67 dBm is a pretty good signal strength to strive for. If you see negative 30, negative 40, that means you're basically on top of the access point. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be that much greater or that you have to have that high of signal strength. Again, if you see like negative 50, negative 60, you're going to be pretty good there. As soon as you start dropping below negative 67, around negative 70, 80, negative 90 dBm, you're going to start dropping packets, dropping frames. Video is going to be a little more laggy, things like that. So kind of to get into some selling points of Chanalyzer, we call this the deep dive into spectrum analysis. Again, it's Windows only, and its main focus is spectrum analysis, and it has a little bit of Wi-Fi scanning built in as well. You can locate sources of interference, which is really nice. Basically, the Chanalyzer Essential Bundle, which Streakwave offers and sells, it comes with a directional antenna that you can actually, if you remove the omnidirectional antenna that comes with the Wi-Fi, you can plug in the directional antenna and kind of directionally locate sources of interference. And you can kind of see this little GIF below of how that works. And then you can use what's called the device finder feature in Chanalyzer to locate it, which I'll showcase here in a second. Again, like I said, there's a Wi-Fi scanner tacked on to Chanalyzer, so you can see the signal strength over time of your network and neighboring networks. As you walk around, it raises and lowers. And I'll kind of show you how to check for this. And so you can really find Wi-Fi dead spots. And by dead spots, I mean signal strengths lower than negative 67, right? Because that's kind of the threshold, it's kind of the achievable signal strength that you want to have throughout your household. The biggest selling point of Chanalyzer, the biggest kind of differentiator of this tool from other MetaGeek tools, is its waterfall navigation. So it's a lot like a DVR. You can kind of pause, you can rewind, you can fast forward, and really troubleshoot interference just like a DVR. And then, of course, once you kind of have what you want, whether you removed interference, checked for signal strength, things like that, you can put all of your work in a nice report and make you look very, very professional, which I'll show how to do that as well. If you deploy Cisco access points, if they are the clean air enabled access points, then you can also troubleshoot remotely. So I know a lot of customers that will deploy, 3802s, for instance, are kind of the newest access point by Cisco, and then they don't actually have to go to the site to troubleshoot the spectrum or the Wi-Fi data. They can just connect to the clean air module, and Streakwave does sell this accessory as well, standalone. Again, it's really important to kind of talk about non-Wi-Fi interference like microwaves. Kind of in the 802.11 protocol, like I was talking about earlier, if a Wi-Fi device hears something else talking, whether it's another Wi-Fi device or just even a microwave leaking RF in the 2.4 gigahertz band, they all wait their turn to talk, right, until your burrito's finished microwaving. And so it's really important to have a spectrum analyzer to kind of see what the spectrum's looking like, to see if your Wi-Fi devices are waiting their turn to talk due to some sort of significant interference. Some examples of that, like I said, baby monitors are very frustrating because they tend to hop from channel to channel. This one went from channel 5 to channel 9, and then from channel 9 to channel 1. It's really nice to use a tool like Chanalyzer to see that behavior, to see that channel hopping. Bluetooth is very similar. It frequency hops as well. It's very fast, though. It's a lot different than a baby monitor in that this happens, probably once a second. It just hops over to the next 5 megahertz wide channel. Typically, you don't see Bluetooth like this. This is a lot of Bluetooth devices at once with some file transfers going on as well. Typically, if you have 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever devices that are Bluetooth, they're not going to affect the Wi-Fi too much until you have a lot. And then this is kind of an older, this is almost a vintage picture now because wireless video cameras are no longer, they're not really independent anymore. They used to look like this, like with a really unique signature, almost looks like a crown. Now they actually are typically on the Wi-Fi network now with the Nest and things like that. Cameras typically will look like Wi-Fi signatures now with that kind of either using DSSS or the OFDM modulation scheme. You'll see a 20 megahertz wide signature now for Wi-Fi cameras. And with that, I'll go ahead and hop in Chanalyzer and kind of showcase some of these things and kind of show you how to get started, so to speak. So right off the bat, when you fire up Chanalyzer, it starts sweeping the 2.4 gigahertz band only. And so a lot of times I tell customers to just go to the Wi-Spy menu at the top here and select dual band. And this will start sweeping both the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz band at the same time. And to toggle between the two, you just click this arrow in the top left corner. So right now you can see I'm looking at the 2.4 gigahertz band because I'm seeing channels 1 through 13. If I want to go to the 5 gigahertz band, I just click the arrow up here, and now I see 36 through 165, the full 5 gigahertz band. And this color information here that you're seeing is the spectrum just being populated over time. I'm going to let it kind of run a little bit more, and you'll kind of start to see some shapes start to appear. But I'm going to go back to the 2.4 gigahertz band and kind of show you down here at the bottom the networks table. So right now I have 0 networks selected, but if I wanted to troubleshoot maybe my network, I could put a little check, kind of a check mark next to my network, which is called Cathyfi. That's the name of my Wi-Fi network here. And the networks table tells you a lot of stuff. Again, Chanalyzer is a Wi-Fi scanner as well. So this is all just stuff we get from the beacons or the 802.11 protocol. So I can see I have a network on channel 11, on channel 48 as well in the 5 gigahertz band, and I can see my signal strength and then how many BSSIDs that my laptop sees. So right now I actually do have a studio out back, and that's what this little network here is. It's kind of pretty far away at negative 85 dBm or so, but that's what that's seeing right here. This is my main network, which is just on the other side of the wall for me. So that's at negative 35. And so this, most of my Wi-Fi devices connect to this network, of course, because it's so much closer. If I wanted to see all the other networks that are around me, I can just simply place a check mark in this kind of top master box here, which then will display all my neighboring networks. So now I can see all my neighbors' networks too, which is always kind of fun to take a look at. And I can see what type of vendors they're using as well. Looks like I have one neighbor using an Apple router similar to myself. You know, I can see SUSE-Tech, Netgear, things like that, some CenturyLink routers that I see here. So I know that there's a lot of CenturyLink users here, which is pretty interesting to see. One thing to keep in mind too is this networks graph, which basically plots the signal strength over time. If you have all the networks selected, it kind of looks messy and colorful, but so to speak, if I use that feature, I pretty much want to use my network only. So I'm going to keep CathiFi checked, go to networks graph, and this plots my signal strength over time. So if I'm tethered to my desk, of course, right now, but if I were to walk around, say, farther away from my access point, I would see these lines kind of start to drop down a little bit more like this. And maybe if I got closer to my studio access point outside, this would probably start to rise up a little bit like this. And I can kind of see, again, you kind of have to place an imaginary threshold here at about -67. But as you can see, in my current environment, I have really, really good signal strength. I would just want to make sure that you know, I have at least one access point above this -67 dBm threshold in order to verify that I, you know, have good solid Wi-Fi coverage throughout the house. So that's kind of how you use Chanalyzer to check for Wi-Fi dead spots. But again, Chanalyzer is a spectrum analysis tool. That's its focus. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce some spectrum because right now I'm just seeing blue spectrum here. That means that the spectrum is really clean. Clearly, my neighbors aren't really using the networks. As you guys can see, there's some slight, you can kind of see this slight 802.11b activity right here. Even you can see the little null carrier right there. Yeah, this basically right here is a 802.11b signature. So that's how I know that my Wi-Fi network is basically beaconing 10 times a millisecond, saying, "Hey, I'm CathiFi, I support these data rates. You can connect to me," and that's what this kind of, you can see this DSSS modulation scheme being used here because it's that curve shape. So those lower data rates are being used to send those beacons. But again, I'm going to go ahead and introduce a little bit of some non-Wi-Fi interference here on the 2.4 gigahertz band, and let me know if you guys can see this shape starting to appear. Little note on the waterfall, I'm looking at the last 2 minutes of spectrum. And so this shape right now still looks blue because in the last 2 minutes, it still hasn't taken up a lot of airtime. But you can start to see really quickly in the waterfall and how helpful this is. You can start to see some this kind of red streak here. And you can see even right here that there's a lot of red going on. And so pretty soon you can tell this is gonna turn red in the amplitude graph. So I'm going to go ahead and shrink my time span up to just see this interference here. And there you go. You can see how easy it is to just kind of click and drag the time selector over this source of interference. And let's say this is an intermittent source of interference because that's what's really helpful about the waterfall graph. I'm going to remove it again and say maybe this only comes on for about a minute or so, and then it turns off, which is a very common use case that I hear from customers quite a bit. Sources of interference coming on, kind of wreaking havoc on the Wi-Fi and then turning back off again before you can figure out what the heck it is. So that's what's really cool about Chanalyzer, is that I just captured this in time. So I turned off the interference. As you can see, if I go back to live here, there's nothing there. And then when I go back here, I can kind of pause it and say, okay, what is this thing exactly? And the first thing I would kind of recommend trying is going to the interferers tab, which is to the left of the networks table and networks graph. And this is pretty cool because you can actually click on signatures and drag it up and see what's going on here. So here's some 802.11b activity, which of course fits more over here with the beacons that I explained earlier, but clearly it's not Wi-Fi. It's kind of fun to drag these up to show you what, here's some GN activity, clearly not that. You can see that this wasn't G activity over here. Clearly it's not Wi-Fi, so I'll stop clicking on those signatures here. You know, as an AV transmitter, you just click it and kind of hover over here and see if it fits. It's clearly not an AV transmitter. What this device is, it's actually a signal generator, and it's supposed to mimic more of an RFID reader. So you can see that this signature fits nicely right there. So maybe I know what it is now. So at this point, maybe the technician can walk around and try and find this device. but maybe we still don't know where it is. Maybe we've identified it, but we don't know where it is. It could be in the walls, and I've seen this happen a lot with customers where something's in the ceiling, whether it's an access point or a source of interference, or it's some sort of a piece of equipment they had no idea was even there. So I'm going to introduce this interference again, and let's show you how to use the directional antenna and the device finder. I'm going to actually keep the omnidirectional antenna attached because it usually works quite well. But I want to show you how the device finder feature works. So once this interference is kind of barking and you see it pretty clearly, you can actually just click and drag around the source here. Then you click device finder. You can clean up your selection. So I'm going to just clean it up just a little bit here. And then you hit the check mark, and then you enter what's called device finder mode. And at this point, you basically play hot or cold with the signal strength. And so if the device gets farther away from you, I'm going to go ahead and attenuate the signal and kind of bring it farther away. That blue line goes down. That means you're getting farther away from it. And then if you get it a little bit closer, I'm going to unattenuate the signal and bring it a little bit closer. That blue line goes up. And so what that means is that you're pretty much on top of it at this point. And so it's pretty straightforward, basically playing hot or cold with the signal strength. So at this point, let's say we found it. I'm going to go ahead and exit out of it. I'm going to give it a little bit more time here to sweep since we started a new session. When you enter device finder mode, it starts a new sweeping session. And I'll kind of show you how to manage those sessions a little bit later. But now I'm going to go ahead and remove this source of interference. Let's say we found it, we unplugged the device or smashed it with a hammer or something like that. But we went ahead and found the device here, and now we're going to have some clean spectrum starting to showcase. To go back in time, you just have to go to View and Session Manager. And so you can see here on the left-hand side all of the sessions that I had. That very first moment when I opened Chanalyzer and it only swept the 2.4 gigahertz band, that was 12 seconds. I'm going to go ahead and delete that because that was just kind of didn't need that. But if I want to go back to the 2.4 gigahertz band here, I can see that data populate. So here are those little moments, and maybe I want to show the customer that there was some interference here. Maybe I want to provide some reports for that. So at this point, I'll go to Report Builder at the top here, just click New Report, and this is pretty straightforward. Wherever your time selection is on the left-hand side, that's what gets built into the report. And so maybe I want to show the density graph here, which shows that interference spike and then some of the light interference, as well as my networks, which is pretty cool. It shows my Cathify network here on the amplitude graph as well. What's really cool about the Report Builder accessory is that it comes pre-stocked with literature. So it explains the colors, for instance. So, the customer can understand, okay, blue means less than 10% utilization. So blue is a lot like a clap. Basically, it doesn't interrupt my conversation with you guys. It just, it's just kind of a slight inconvenience, but the Wi-Fi is still going to operate as usual. Green means that 20% of the spectrum was being utilized. Yellow is 40%, and red means over 50% of the utilization has been utilized of the spectrum. And so what that means is that's like if someone came into my office right now and started blaring an air horn while I'm trying to give this presentation. That would clearly interrupt me. I would have to start yelling for you guys to hear me. And that's essentially what this RF signature did here, what this jammer did. It's a lot like an air horn on the Wi-Fi network. And so it's pretty nice that you can, that this report kind of comes pre-stocked with that type of information, makes you look really, really professional. And then maybe what I want to add here too is I want to add a networks table. The reason why I want to add this networks table here is because, as you can see, there aren't any networks on channels 6 or 5 or anything like that. In between 1 and 11, that source of interference knocked everything out. And so maybe I want to show what it looks like now in real time. We'll just do let's just do the last few maybe minute 37. Sure, that works well. Then we'll go back to Report Builder and we'll add a new density graph here, which shows, actually let's go back to 2.4. I was on the 5 gigahertz band there. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this report that I just added, that little section there. I'm going to add a new density graph of the 2.4 gigahertz band, which shows the removed interference. And then of course I'm going to add the networks table, which is kind of a before and after to show. Actually, let's get a little bit more. There should be some more networks here at this point. Let's take a look here. Yeah, see there's a lot more networks there now on channels 6, 5, and so on. It looks like another network there. So this looks pretty good. Let's add this little bit just to show that there were some more networks that were allowed to kind of breathe after that interference was removed. Oh, that's the networks graph. There's the networks table. There we go. You can see a lot more networks. If you do kind of a before and after here, if I just kind of scroll to this section here, you can kind of see only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 networks displayed, and then of course a lot more here now that that interference has been removed. It's kind of a nice little before after. You can edit all these parts as well. For instance, if I didn't want to have this same information here that was basically repeated above it, you know, you can take that parts out and you can add to it if you need to. And then you can always go back and edit these reports. You can save them as a separate file on your hard drive and go back and edit them. And of course, you can export them as PDF and print them and hand them directly to your customer. So it makes you look very, very professional. And then finally, the Cisco Clean Air, all you really need is the IP address and NSI key of the access point in order to tap into the Cisco Clean Air accessory for the Cisco access points. And then you're off and running with that. So very easy. I don't actually have one set up in my household, but it's pretty easy to set that up. And yeah, with that, I think that's pretty much all I wanted to showcase today. There's a lot of other really cool kind of more advanced features. Of course, there's a lot of, if you're an RF engineer, there's a lot of pretty fun things you can do here at the top, which again, I'm not much of an RF guy, but there's certainly a lot of pretty interesting things. So I recommend at least trialing Chanalyzer, which you can just Google, you know, Chanalyzer trial. And then of course, StreakWave offers the Chanalyzer Essential Bundle right now. So yeah, with that, Angela, I'll go ahead and open up the floor to any questions that might be out there.
All right, great. So a question came up a little while ago while you were doing the demo. They were asking, what AP are you using?
Oh yeah, good question. Right now, you know, this is just my own home Wi-Fi network, so I'm actually using an Apple Airport Extreme. I believe it's the 5th generation. And then out in the studio, I have an Airport Express, which is like a 2nd generation Airport Express. And so interestingly enough, this brings up a good point about physical mode here, which breaks down the access points as opposed to consolidating them via SSID. You can actually see that my access point out in the studio is, let's see if I can find it here. Yeah, this one right here. This one is just BGN only, and it has a 144 max data rate. So you can tell it's a 2nd generation because it doesn't have as high of data rates as the 4th or 5th generation, which is the one right below it. It's a 802.11, I think it's N only, so it doesn't even have AC capabilities. Yeah, good question.
Great, thank you for that.
Yeah.
I don't see any other questions, but I did want to see if you wanted to go ahead and mention about that today is that final day for the 50% off sale.
That's right, indeed. Yep, and so yep, you know, we had kind of a Crush Corona 50% off sale, and that was extended through our partners as well, which includes StreakWave. And so yeah, today is a really good day actually to purchase tools like this. What's really great about Chanalyzer Central is that you get this Wi-Fi DBX, which in my opinion is a very important piece of equipment to have in your tool belt, this spectrum analyzer. That's what was allowing me to see that non-Wi-Fi interference from earlier. Again, if you didn't have something like that, you wouldn't be able to see interference like this. You have no idea that something like this could be wreaking havoc on your Wi-Fi network or you know, your customer's Wi-Fi network, whatever job you do. So you know, the fact that it's half off right now is pretty much you basically get a, you know, Wi-Fi for free, but you get the software as well. So pretty good value right there. And again, StreakWave should be able to offer that 50% off as well.
Yes, we are. I guess that's all the time that we have, and those are all the questions. So Casey, thank you for your time and your presentation, and thank you attendees for attending. We will share this recording with everybody, and like Casey said, we are offering that 50% off sale that ends today. So if there's anything else that you wanted to just add before we hang up, Casey?
No, I think that's it. I really appreciate you having me here today, Angela. Looking forward to the next one.
Yes, definitely. Stay tuned as we will be continuously doing more webinars with MetaGeek. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you.